They say silence in the workplace is golden, a sign of focus, of heads-down productivity. But that's a comfortable lie we tell ourselves in the fluorescent hum of the open-plan office. Sometimes, silence isn't golden. It's the slow, cold hardening of a soul pushed to its absolute limit, a pressure that forges not peace, but a weapon. It's the quiet before a storm that no one, least of all the one who created it, sees coming. For Alara Vance, sitting in the sterile quiet of her manager's office, that silence was becoming diamond-hard, sharp enough to cut. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the ghost of a decision made long before she was ever invited to sit in the cold, faux leather chair. Across the polished mahogany desk, Marcus Thorne smiled, but the expression never reached his eyes. His eyes were cold, calculating, the eyes of a predator that had just successfully cornered its prey. He adjusted his perfectly tailored suit jacket, a gesture of casual power that made Alara's stomach clench. He spoke, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone, the kind that charmed executives and terrified subordinates in equal measure. He used words like strategic realignment and optimizing departmental synergy, empty corporate phrases designed to obscure the brutal, personal reality of what was happening. He told her that her performance on Project Chimera, the groundbreaking AI initiative she had built from nothing, had been adequate, but that the project now required a different leadership profile. Therefore, effective immediately, she was being reassigned. Her new role was in junior data analytics, a digital dungeon, a place where brilliant careers went to die. Alara didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She simply stared back at him, her expression a perfect, placid mask. Inside, however, a universe of fire and ice was being born. The shock was a physical blow, a wave of cold that washed over her, followed by the searing heat of rage. It wasn't just the demotion. It was the reason, the unspoken truth that hung between them. Her polite but firm rejection of his advances a week prior. This wasn't a business decision. It was a punishment. It was his hand on her career, squeezing, reminding her who held the power. Through the glass wall of Marcus's office, she could see her team, and standing among them was Chloe Reed, her best friend, her confidant. Chloe was looking in, her hand over her mouth in a pantomime of shock, but Alara saw a flicker of something else in her eyes, a glint of triumph. And in that moment, the betrayal was complete. Marcus was the executioner, but Chloe had helped sharpen the axe. As Marcus slid a form across the desk for her to sign, his smile widened, a final act of dominance. Alara picked up the pen, her hand steady. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint scratch of ink on paper. But it was a different kind of silence now. It was the silence of acceptance, not of defeat, but of the terms of a war she never wanted to fight, but now would stop at nothing to win. To understand the depth of the betrayal, you must first understand what was taken. It wasn't just a title or a corner office. For Alara Vance, it was a universe of her own creation. She was not born into the world of Innovatech solutions. She had built her place in it, line by painstaking line of code. Alara was an architect of the digital age, a quiet, intensely focused woman whose mind moved with the elegant complexity of the systems she designed. She came from a background where nothing was given and everything was earned, a truth that had been etched into her work ethic. While others networked over expensive lunches, Alara found her voice in the silent, logical purity of programming. She didn't play the political games, she built the platforms the games were played on. And her magnum opus, the project that had consumed her nights and weekends for 18 months, was called Chimera. Project Chimera wasn't just another piece of software. It was a revolutionary predictive analytics engine, an artificial intelligence that could see the future. Not in the mystical sense, but in the cold, hard language of data. It could analyze billions of market variables, consumer behaviors, and geopolitical shifts to forecast industry trends with an accuracy that bordered on clairvoyant. It was the kind of technology that could make a company like Innovatech billions, cementing its place as a leader for the next decade. Chimera was Alara's soul rendered in code. She knew every one of its digital neurons, every pathway of its logic. She had named it Chimera because it was a beautiful monster, a hybrid of a dozen different coding languages and theoretical models, all fused into something new, powerful, and entirely hers. It was this project that had caught the eye of Marcus Thorne. In the beginning, Marcus was the ideal mentor. He was the vice president of product development, a man with a reputation for spotting and cultivating talent. He saw the spark in Alara when she was just a mid-level developer, and he gave her the oxygen it needed to become a fire. He championed her, pushed her, and when she came to him with the radical, half-formed concept for Chimera, he didn't dismiss it. He saw the potential both in the project and in her. He carved out a budget, gave her a small team, and provided the political cover she needed to work on something so experimental. "Don't worry about the noise," he'd told her in those early days, his voice a reassuring balm against the skepticism of other executives. "You just build. I'll handle the suits." He praised her publicly, citing her innovative thinking in company-wide meetings. He made her feel seen, valued. For a long time, Alara saw him not just as a boss, but as a genuine champion of her work, the kind of advocate every ambitious professional dreams of having. He was the gatekeeper, and he had opened the gate for her. And through it all, there was Chloe Reed. If Marcus was Alara's professional champion, Chloe was her personal one. They had started at Innovatech in the same week, two bright, ambitious young women navigating the shark-infested waters of a competitive tech firm. They bonded instantly over late-night debugging sessions, fueled by stale coffee and cheap pizza. They shared everything: frustrations about impossible deadlines, dreams of future promotions, secrets about their lives outside the office walls. Chloe was the one Alara called when a breakthrough in Chimera's code finally clicked at 3 a.m. Chloe was the one who dragged Alara out for a celebratory drink when they secured their first round of internal funding. She was witty, charming, and fiercely intelligent, the perfect complement to Alara's more reserved and focused nature. "We're a team, Vance," Chloe would often say, linking her arm through Alara's. "You're the genius who builds the rockets, and I'm the one who makes sure they fly straight. Together, we're going to own this place." Alara believed her. She trusted Chloe with access to Chimera's core architecture, with her professional vulnerabilities, and most of all, with her friendship. It was a bond forged in the high-pressure crucible of corporate life, a bond Alara thought was unbreakable. This was Alara's world, before the fall. It was a world of purpose, defined by the steady, satisfying rhythm of creation and innovation. Her life was Project Chimera. Her orbit was defined by Marcus's guidance and Chloe's friendship. She was respected, she was on the fast track, and she was building something that mattered. The long hours were not a burden, but a privilege. The sacrifices felt like investments in a future that seemed not only bright, but guaranteed. She was the architect, and she was standing in the magnificent structure she had designed and built herself, surrounded by the people she trusted most to help her complete it. She had no idea that the foundation was already compromised, that the very people she trusted to hold up the walls were the ones who were about to watch them, and even help them, come crashing down around her. She was so focused on the blueprint of the future, she never saw the rot in the present. The corrosion began subtly, not with a sudden fracture, but like a fine, hairline crack spreading through a solid foundation. It was a change in pressure, a shift in the atmosphere so gradual that at first, Alara questioned if she was imagining it. The professional respect that Marcus Thorne had shown her, once the bedrock of their working relationship, began to erode, replaced by something cloying and proprietary. It started with the compliments. The praise for her work, once specific and technical, became vague and personal. "Brilliant algorithm," Alara, turned into, "You're just brilliant, Alara." A comment that could be taken either way. A statement suspended in ambiguity. Then, the compliments drifted further from her work and closer to her person. A remark about the color of her blouse, a comment on how her focus was attractive. Each one was a small test, a tiny push against a boundary to see if it would hold. Alara, a master of navigating complex systems, treated these moments like bugs in the code anomalies, to be handled with calm, professional logic. She would deflect with practiced ease, steering the conversation immediately back to the project. "Thank you, Marcus. Now, regarding the Q3 data integration, I think I've found a solution. She built a firewall of professionalism around herself, hoping the message was clear. But the intrusions only mutated, finding new pathways. The end of the workday became a gauntlet. Marcus would find reasons to be leaving at the exact same time as her. His casual, "I'll walk you out," feeling less like a courtesy and more like a claim. The conversations in the elevator, once about server capacity and launch timelines, now veered towards her personal life. Was she seeing anyone? What did she do on the weekends? Ilara gave polite, non-committal answers, her keys already in her hand the moment the elevator doors opened, eager to escape into the anonymity of the city. Then came the texts. They always started with a plausible work-related pretext, usually late in the evening, "Just had a thought about the Chimera user interface." But the message would inevitably be followed by another. "Hope I'm not disturbing you. What are you up to?" It was a masterful tactic of intrusion, forcing her into a dilemma. To ignore the message would be to seem unresponsive as a project lead. To answer the personal question would be to open a door she desperately wanted to keep closed. Her solution was to wait until the next morning, replying to his work query in a crisp, professional email, completely ignoring the personal hook. It was a silent, digital battle of wills. The unease began to curdle into a constant, low-grade anxiety. The vibration of her phone would make her heart jump. The sight of his name in her inbox would cause a knot to form in her stomach. The office, once her sanctuary of logic and creation, now felt like a stage where she was constantly being watched. He began manufacturing reasons for one-on-one meetings, often in his office with the door closed, canceling on other team members at the last minute. He would stand too close, leaning over her shoulder to look at her laptop screen, his presence a heavy, unwelcome weight in her personal space. A hand on her shoulder to congratulate her on a minor success would linger just a second too long, the heat of his palm, a sickening imprint she could feel long after he'd walked away. Each incident, viewed in isolation, was deniable. He was just being friendly. He was just an enthusiastic boss, a mentor. Any complaint would make her sound hysterical, ungrateful, or worse, difficult. She was trapped in a web of plausible deniability, and she knew he was the one spinning it. Feeling increasingly isolated, she tried, once, to confide in Chloe. Over lunch in the bustling company cafeteria, she cautiously broached the subject. "Has Marcus been acting a little strange with you lately?" she asked, picking at her salad. Chloe looked up from her phone, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes before it was replaced with a bright, dismissive smile. "Strange. How?" "Like how he's obsessed with your project and thinks you're the smartest person in the building." She laughed. "Oh, that's just Marcus being Marcus. He's old school. He gets invested in his star players. Honestly, Ilara, I'd kill for that kind of attention from him. It means you're on the path to the top. Don't overthink it." The words were meant to be reassuring, but they felt like a door slamming shut in Ilara's face. Chloe didn't see it, or she didn't want to see it. The dismissal left Ilara feeling utterly alone, a silent scream trapped in her throat. Her closest ally had just invalidated her reality, painting her anxiety as ambition's foolish cousin. She never brought it up again. The corrosion deepened. The subtle cracks were now visible fissures. The final illusion of a normal professional relationship shattered during a late-night work session to fix a critical bug before a deadline. It was just the two of them in the vast, empty office. After the bug was fixed, as Ilara was packing her bag, Marcus stood in the doorway of her office, blocking her exit. "You know, Ilara," he said, his voice low and intimate in the quiet space. "A project like Chimera, it changes things. It changes careers. The person who successfully launches this will go very, very far in this company." He took a step closer. "You're so dedicated, so brilliant. You deserve to be in charge of it all. I can make that happen. All you have to do is show me you're a team player, that you're on my team." There was no ambiguity this time. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. It wasn't an offer. It was a price tag. And as Ilara looked into the cold, expectant eyes of the man who was once her mentor, she knew that the subtle corrosion was over. This was now a hostile takeover. The air in Alara's small office was suddenly thin, the silence after Marcus's proposition, a suffocating vacuum. His words, "that you're on my team," hung between them, no longer a suggestion but a declaration of terms. This was the price of her ambition, laid bare under the cold fluorescent lights. For a long moment, Alara felt a disorienting sense of detachment, as if she were watching a scene from a movie. This couldn't be her life, her career, the one she had so meticulously built on merit and dedication. But the predatory gleam in Marcus's eyes was undeniably real. She broke the silence, her voice steady and cool, a minor miracle of self-control. "My commitment has always been to the success of this project and to Innovatech. I think my work speaks for itself." It was a non-answer, a professional parry to a deeply personal thrust. She began packing her bag with deliberate, measured movements, not turning her back on him, but creating a clear intention of departure. "It's late, Marcus. We can continue this conversation during business hours." The implicit message was clear. This conversation, in this manner, was over. Marcus watched her, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face before being replaced by that same confident smile. He stepped aside from the doorway. "Of course, Alara. You're right. We'll talk tomorrow. Get some rest. Big things are coming." The words were a promise and a threat, all in one. The next day, the summons came via a sterile calendar invitation. Strategic planning session. Project Chimera. It was in the main conference room, a formal setting, but the attendee list had only two names, Marcus Thorne and Alara Vance. When she walked in, he was already there, standing before the large panoramic window overlooking the city, a king surveying his domain. He was all business now, his demeanor perfectly calibrated to that of a senior executive. He motioned for her to sit and began to speak, not of their conversation the night before, but of the future. He painted a masterpiece of a career path. He spoke of a new position being created upon Chimera's successful launch, Director of Product Innovation. It was a role that hadn't even been a whisper in the corporate corridors. It meant a seat at the executive table, a team of 50, a salary that would change her life, and stock options that would make her wealthy. He described the corner office on the top floor, the influence she would have, the legacy she could build. He was not just offering her a job, he was offering her the world, or at least the world as defined by Innovatech solutions. And as he spoke, he began to build the cage. The bars were gilded with promises of success, the floor padded with the comforts of wealth and status. He laid it all out for her, the beautiful, irresistible trap. Then, he began to slide the lock into place. "Of course," he said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "A role of this magnitude, it's about more than just results. It's about trust, a deep, unwavering loyalty between a vice president and his director." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "The person in this role will be my right hand, my partner. We'll be traveling together, winning deals together, celebrating together. We need to be in perfect sync, to anticipate each other's needs, to have a relationship that transcends the normal 9 to 5. There it was again, the coded language, the deliberate blurring of lines. A partnership, a relationship. He was asking her to surrender her autonomy, her very self, in exchange for the keys to the kingdom. He was telling her, without ever saying the words, that the price of the promotion was her. Alara sat there, feeling the cold steel of the cage closing around her. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it was matched only by the insidious temptation. A part of her, the part that had struggled and sacrificed for years, was mesmerized by the prize. She could see the future he was offering, the respect, the security, the power to bring her most ambitious ideas to life. For a fleeting, horrifying moment, she wondered if the price was worth it. Could she endure it? Could she play the game? Give him whatever carefully curated version of loyalty he wanted, just long enough to secure her position and then build her own fortress of power? The thought was a venom that spread through her veins, making her feel sick with self-loathing. She looked past Marcus, out the window at the city skyline, at the thousands of windows representing thousands of other people just trying to build a life. She thought of the elegant, logical lines of her code for Chimera, a system built on truth and data. Her work was clean, it was honest. To accept his offer would be to corrupt everything, to admit that her talent wasn't enough, that her worth was conditional. It would be a betrayal of the young woman who had put herself through school, who had believed that meritocracy was real. She left the meeting with a vague promise to consider the strategic implications. Walking back to her desk in a daze, she saw Chloe, who immediately rushed over, her eyes bright with curiosity. "So? Big secret meeting with the big boss? Are you getting a promotion?" Alara just shook her head, unable to form words. "Come on, spill," Chloe pressed, a greedy edge to her voice. "I heard whispers about a new director role that has your name written all over it. God, Alara, whatever you're doing, it's working. You'd better play your cards right. A chance like this won't come again." Chloe's words, meant to be encouraging, struck Alara like a slap. Play your cards right. Was the price she had to pay so obvious to everyone else? Or was Chloe simply so blinded by her own ambition that she couldn't see the danger her friend was in? That night, Alara sat in front of her monitor, the complex architecture of Project Chimera glowing on the screen. It was beautiful, powerful, and it was hers. It was a testament to her mind, her will. Looking at her creation, her decision solidified. She would not bow, she would not break, she would not compromise. She would finish her project, make it so undeniably successful, so critical to the company's future, that they would have no choice but to give her what she had earned. She would win on her own terms. It was a defiant, noble, and dangerously naive plan. She was choosing to fight a battle of honor against an opponent who had none. The days following Alara's non-decision were a strange, tense limbo. Marcus was professionally distant, communicating only through curt emails and third parties. The air was thick with a silent, simmering pressure. He was giving her time, letting her stew in the implications of his offer, allowing the allure of the gilded cage to work its magic on her ambition. But Alara's resolve, forged in the quiet of her own conscience, did not waver. She threw herself into her work with a ferocious intensity, meeting every deadline, solving every problem, making Project Chimera so flawless, so undeniably brilliant, that her merit alone would be an argument he couldn't refute. It was her final, desperate belief in the system, a belief that was about to be systematically dismantled. The confrontation came on a Thursday evening. He caught her as she was logging off, his presence filling the doorway of her office once again. The charm was gone. His face was a mask of impatience. "I need an answer, Alara," he said, his voice flat and hard. "We're running out of time. Are you going to be a part of the future we discussed, or not?" Alara took a slow breath, stood up, and faced him directly. She would not cower. Her voice was the epitome of professionalism, yet it held the unyielding strength of steel. "Marcus, my answer is this. My focus is, and always will be, on the technical and commercial success of Project Chimera. I'm confident that my leadership will deliver the results we need. I believe our working relationship should remain strictly professional to guarantee the integrity of that outcome." She had chosen her words with surgical precision. She did not accuse. She did not get emotional. She simply drew a clear, unambiguous line in the sand, using the very language of the corporate world he weaponized. It was a checkmate in the language of professionalism. For a moment, he stared at her, his mind processing her formal, airtight rejection. She saw a brief flash of disbelief in his eyes, the shock of a man who was not used to being told no. Then, something inside him seemed to snap. The mask of the charismatic executive didn't just slip, it shattered. His face darkened, his lips tightened into a sneer. A low, humorless chuckle escaped his throat. "Professional integrity," he scoffed, the words dripping with contempt. "That's a very noble sentiment, Alara. It's a luxury for people who have power. You have a job. And I'm beginning to think you're not a good fit for it. You've just made a very serious miscalculation." He turned and walked away without another word, leaving a chill in the air that was colder than any winter wind. Alara stood frozen, the finality of his threat echoing in the sudden silence. She knew then that the axe was about to fall. It fell the next morning. Retaliation was not a private affair. It was a public spectacle, a brutal and efficient execution designed to make an example of her. She walked into the 10 o'clock Project Chimera status meeting, coffee in hand, ready to lead. But Marcus was already at the head of the table, a place he rarely took in these technical check-ins. Chloe was seated to his right, looking down at her notepad, avoiding Alara's gaze. The rest of the team shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A knot of dread tightened in Alara's stomach. Marcus began the meeting without preamble. "Good morning, everyone. I've been doing a deep strategic review of Chimera, and I've decided the project needs a new direction in its leadership. It needs a more collaborative approach moving forward." He then turned his gaze to Chloe, his voice warming into a tone of paternal pride. Chloe here has shown an incredible talent for fostering team spirit, for being a true team player. She understands that success isn't just about individual brilliance, it's about synergy and loyalty. Every word was a poisoned dart aimed directly at Alara. Then he delivered the killing blow. Which is why, effective immediately, I am promoting Chloe Reed to Senior Project Lead of Chimera. She will be taking over all leadership duties. A stunned silence fell over the room. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. It felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. She looked at Chloe, who finally lifted her head. Chloe had tears in her eyes, a perfect performance of overwhelmed humility. "Oh, Marcus, I don't know what to say," she stammered, placing a hand on her heart. "I'm so honored. I won't let you down." Alara looked into the eyes of the woman who had shared her secrets, her dreams, her fears. And in those tear-filled eyes, beneath the facade of shock, she saw the cold, hard glint of triumph. The betrayal was absolute, a physical pain that was sharper than any knife. But Marcus wasn't finished. He turned his attention to Alara, his expression now one of mild, clinical pity. "Alara, your technical skills are, of course, valuable. So we've created a new role for you in the data analytics division where your singular focus can be better utilized. HR will be in touch with the details of your transition." It was over. In the space of 90 seconds, in front of the team she had built, he had stripped her of her project, her title, her dignity, and her friend. She had been publicly beheaded. No one in the room would meet her eyes. They stared at the table, at their laptops, anywhere but at the carnage. With a composure that she would later not understand, Alara simply nodded once, picked up her notebook, and walked out of the room. The long walk back to her desk was a journey through a nightmare. Every head that turned, every whispered conversation that stopped as she passed, was another blow. This was his true power. Not just the ability to demote her, but the ability to utterly humiliate her, to poison her name and her reputation with the silent consent of her peers. She sat down at her desk, her creation, her future, now in the hands of her betrayers. The naive hope she had clung to was gone, burned away by the searing heat of injustice. All that remained was a cold, quiet, and infinitely patient rage. The game was over. A war had just begun. The world doesn't just change, it shrinks. For Alara, the sprawling, vibrant landscape of her career at Innovatech collapsed into a gray, featureless cubicle in a forgotten corner of the building's third floor. Her new workspace was a deliberate insult, a piece of corporate real estate no one else wanted, situated next to the shuddering drone of the industrial printers and beneath a flickering fluorescent light that hummed a maddening, off-key tune. Her powerful, custom-built workstation was gone, replaced by a decade-old desktop that groaned under the weight of opening a spreadsheet. And the work itself was a special kind of hell, a punishment designed by a cruel and imaginative god. Alara Vance, the architect of the revolutionary Chimera AI, now spent her days on a task called Legacy Data Reconciliation. It was a meaningless title for a meaningless job, manually copying and pasting endless rows of numbers from one outdated system to another. The rhythmic, monotonous click of her mouse and the clack of the keyboard became the soundtrack to her humiliation, a digital water torture designed to erode her intellect and break her spirit. Each click was a reminder. This is what you are now. This is all you are worth. But the true punishment was not the work. It was the silence. Alara became a ghost in the halls she once commanded. The social isolation was swift, total, and brutal. Her former team members, the programmers she had mentored, the analysts she had championed, now treated her as if she were contagious. If she walked towards the coffee machine, the group gathered there would suddenly disperse, their conversations dying in their throats. If she entered the elevator, others would pretend to have forgotten something at their desks rather than ride with her. Their avoidance was a tangible thing, a wall of fear and awkwardness that surrounded her at all times. They were afraid. Marcus had made her a public example, a living monument to the price of defiance, and no one wanted to be seen standing in her shadow. The silence was punctuated only by whispers, the cruel echoes of the official narrative Marcus and Chloe were spinning. As she walked past conference rooms or stood in line at the cafeteria, she would catch fragments of conversations, heard she was impossible to manage. Total diva, wouldn't listen to feedback. Marcus said she just couldn't handle the pressure of a project that big. Each whisper was a small cut, another layer of her reputation being methodically stripped away. They were not just taking her job, they were erasing the person she had been, replacing her with a caricature of their own design. And then there was Chloe. Her betrayal was not a single act, but a continuous, daily performance. Now leading Project Chimera, Chloe wielded her newfound power with a sickening blend of false pity and overt cruelty. She would go out of her way to hold loud, animated team meetings near Alara's desk, her laughter echoing in the space where Alara now sat in exile. She would send Alara patronizing emails, CCing Marcus, asking her to double-check menial data points, a clear assertion of her new dominance. The worst moments were when Chloe would approach her desk, a mask of cloying concern on her face. "Alara," she'd say, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, loud enough for others to hear. "I know this is all so awkward, but I was wondering if you could just take a quick look at this old algorithm you wrote. We're a bit stuck." She would hold out a tablet displaying a small, insignificant piece of Alara's own masterpiece, forcing her to confront what had been stolen. It was a calculated act of psychological torture, a queen visiting a deposed rival in the dungeon to ask for advice on how to wear her crown. Each interaction was a fresh stab of the knife Chloe had so willingly helped to plunge into her back. Nights offered little escape. Alara would go home to her silent apartment, the numbness of the day giving way to waves of unprocessed emotion. Some nights were filled with a white-hot, directionless rage that left her pacing her living room, her fists clenched. Other nights were for grief, a cold, heavy sorrow for the career she had lost, the friendships that had proven to be illusions, and the belief in her own abilities that was now under relentless assault. She replayed every conversation, every warning sign she had missed, every moment she could have done something differently. The self-doubt was a venom, whispering to her in the dark. Was it my fault? Was I too proud? Did I misread everything? But as the weeks bled into a month, the pain began to change. The grief, rage, and humiliation, subjected to the intense pressure of her daily suffering, began to crystallize. The chaotic storm of emotions began to coalesce into a single, hard, and perfectly clear point of focus. One evening, after a particularly brutal day of Chloe's torment, Alara stood in front of her bathroom mirror. She looked at her reflection, at the tired eyes and the defeated slump of her shoulders, and she felt a sudden, fierce surge of defiance. The woman in the mirror was not her. They had created this ghost, this victim. They would not have the satisfaction of watching her fade away. Quitting was what they wanted. Breaking down was the victory they expected. She would do neither. Staying, enduring their petty tortures, was no longer a sign of defeat. It was an act of war. That night, she did not open a spreadsheet. She opened a secure, encrypted file on her personal laptop. She created a new folder. She gave it a simple, elegant name: Project Chimera, True Audit. The quiet, steady clicking of her keyboard filled the apartment, no longer the sound of monotony, but the sound of an architect beginning the plans for a new and terrible design. The most dangerous predator in any ecosystem is the one that has learned to be invisible. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit jungle of Innovatech, Alara Vance perfected the art of camouflage. By day, she was exactly what they wanted her to be: a ghost. She performed her soul, crushing data, entry tasks with a quiet, robotic efficiency. She was punctual, silent, and utterly unremarkable. She ate her lunch at her desk, her eyes fixed on her screen, projecting an aura of defeated compliance. Her invisibility became her shield and her greatest weapon. No one watches the defeated, no one suspects the broken. And so, no one saw the fire of methodical fury burning behind her vacant eyes. Her days were a performance of submission, but her nights were a quiet declaration of war. Her small, anonymous apartment transformed into the nerve center of a one-woman intelligence agency. The exhaustion and despair of the past month had been burned away, leaving behind the cold, clean energy of purpose. She was no longer a victim enduring her fate. She was a silent architect, designing the instrument of her revenge. Her key, her way into the fortress, was a secret she had shared with no one. In the foundational architecture of Project Chimera, Alara had built an undocumented diagnostic and maintenance port. It was a master backdoor, known only to the system's original creator, designed for deep-level debugging in the event of a catastrophic system failure. It was her digital signature, a hidden corridor in the cathedral she had built. In the hands of Marcus and Chloe, Chimera was a prize to be flaunted. To Alara, it was still her home, and she knew all the secret passages. One night, fueled by black coffee and a righteous anger, she sat at her personal laptop and began to pick the lock. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, writing a script to mask her IP address, routing her connection through a chain of anonymous servers across the globe. She took a deep breath and executed the command to access the port. For a heart-stopping moment, there was nothing. Then, a simple command prompt appeared on her black screen. A quiet, unassuming cursor pulsed patiently. She was in. A slow, grim smile touched her lips. They had thrown her out the front door, but they had forgotten she still had the master key to the entire building. Alara was not a hacker. She was an auditor. She did not move to destroy, but to observe, to collect, to build an unshakable case. She began in the server archives, the company's vast digital memory. She hunted for the ghosts of conversations, for the things people thought they had deleted. And she found them. She found pristine, server-side copies of every late-night text Marcus had sent her, each one a small piece of his predatory pattern. She found his emails to the head of human resources, a carefully constructed narrative of her declining performance and lack of team spirit, all dated in the weeks following her first rejections of his advances. It was a cold, calculated campaign to discredit her, and seeing the meticulousness of his treachery only hardened her resolve. She downloaded everything, encrypting each file, cataloging them with the dispassionate precision of a forensic scientist. Each piece of evidence was a confirmation that she was not paranoid, she was not oversensitive, she had been targeted. Her investigation then moved from his character to his business practices. With her high-level access, she could see the project's financials from the inside, the raw, unfiltered data that Marcus presented in polished, manipulated reports to the board. And there, in the dry language of spreadsheets and invoices, she found his next secret. He was stealing. She noticed a series of large, recurring payments to a third-party consulting firm she had never heard of, Thorn Strategic Solutions. The invoices were vague, for services like synergistic consulting and strategic implementation, corporate jargon that meant nothing. A few hours of deep-level digging revealed the truth. The company was a shell corporation, registered to a post office box, and the sole director was a man whose name she recognized as Marcus's brother-in-law. Marcus was approving fraudulent invoices and funneling company money into his own pockets. The man who had punished her for a lack of loyalty was a common thief, bleeding the company dry while posturing as its champion. But the most painful discovery was what they were doing to her creation. She watched, like a ghost in the machine, as Chloe and her new team tore at the elegant tapestry of her code. Under pressure from Marcus to cut costs and accelerate the timeline, they were replacing her custom-built, secure modules with cheaper, off-the-shelf components. They were creating security holes, introducing instabilities, and prioritizing flashy user interface features over the core integrity of the AI engine. They were taking her masterpiece and turning it into a cheap, hollow imitation. It was an act of profound desecration, and it ignited a new kind of anger in Alara. This was no longer just about her career. It was about her legacy. They were not just destroying her, they were destroying her work. She documented every change, every new vulnerability, every shortcut they took. She saw the catastrophic failure they were building toward, a train wreck of their own making, and she meticulously recorded every step they took toward it. The ghost in the machine was no longer just an observer. She was now a witness, gathering the evidence that would not just expose a predator, but condemn an incompetent and corrupt regime. The silence they had imposed on her was about to become the loudest noise they had ever heard. An architect knows the secret weaknesses of their own building. They know which beam carries the most stress, which wall is purely cosmetic, which pillar, if removed, would bring the entire structure down. As Alara sifted through the butchered code of her masterpiece, she felt like the ghost of a master architect haunting a house now occupied by careless, arrogant tenants. She watched them knock down load-bearing walls to create a more open concept design and replace solid foundations with cheap plaster. And then, one late Tuesday night, she found it. The Achilles heel. The single fatal decision that would unravel everything. It was buried deep in the system's core, in the data encryption module. She saw that Chloe's team, under Marcus's directive to cut the budget, had ripped out her custom-built, military-grade encryption algorithm. It had been expensive, yes, but it was designed to be incredibly robust, capable of handling the immense, chaotic torrent of data Chimera was designed to process. In its place, they had plugged in a cheap, off-the-shelf component. A jolt went through Alara, a sickening surge of recognition. She knew this module. She had evaluated and rejected it in the project's infancy. It was notorious in the developer community for a specific, insidious flaw, a memory leak that triggered only under extreme, sustained data loads. For all their testing with small, controlled datasets, it would appear to work perfectly. But on launch day, when connected to the live, global data streams, the digital equivalent of a fire hose, it was designed to fail. A cold dread mixed with a surge of adrenaline washed over her. This wasn't just poor engineering, this was a ticking time bomb. The memory leak would cause the system to consume more and more resources until it inevitably crashed. But that wasn't the worst of it. The flaw had a catastrophic side effect. In the final moments before the system-wide failure, as the module desperately tried to reallocate memory, it would enter a fail-safe mode that, for a few critical seconds, would leave all the data it was processing completely unencrypted. This included sensitive client information, proprietary market analytics, everything. It was a corporate doomsday device, set to detonate on the project's biggest stage. Her first instinct was the ingrained, panicked response of a good engineer: to fix it, to sound the alarm, to prevent the disaster. But then, she stopped. Who would she report it to? Marcus? Chloe? They were the ones who had planted the bomb. An anonymous tip would be ignored, or worse, they would quietly fix it and Marcus would spin it as another example of his team's diligence, catching a potential issue at the last minute. They would still be heroes. She would still be the ghost in the machine. And in that moment of stark clarity, the engineer's instinct died, and the strategist's was born. The flaw was not a problem to be solved. It was a weapon to be wielded. She immediately got to work, not to patch the code, but to prove its deadliness. In a partitioned, virtual corner of her own machine, she built a perfect replica of Chimera's corrupted architecture. She then wrote a script to simulate the data load of launch day, a relentless tsunami of information. She initiated the simulation, her eyes glued to the system performance monitor. For the first hour, everything looked normal. The graphs were stable. Then, she saw the first sign of trouble, a tiny, almost imperceptible rise in the memory usage line. It was the beginning of the leak. She watched, her heart pounding a steady, rhythmic beat against her ribs as the line began to climb. Slowly at first, then with terrifying speed, it arced upwards, a beautiful, deadly curve. System warnings, once green, flashed to yellow, then to a screaming, solid red. And then, a cascade of critical failure alerts filled the screen. The simulation had crashed. She dove into the system logs of the crash, her fingers flying across the keyboard. And there it was, logged in the machine's cold, impartial language, a window of 27 seconds where the data encryption had completely failed. 27 seconds, an eternity. Long enough for any competent rival to steal billions of dollars worth of proprietary data. It was the smoking gun, a digital photograph of the bullet they had unknowingly loaded into their own chamber. She leaned back in her chair, the glow of the screen illuminating her face. A profound and chilling sense of power settled over her. She now had a choice, a trilemma of justice. She could be the silent savior, report the flaw anonymously, and watch her enemies take credit for her work yet again. She could be the nihilistic destroyer, allowing the launch to proceed, watching from the shadows as her masterpiece burned to the ground, taking the company's reputation and the careers of her betrayers with it. Or she could choose a third path, the path of the master strategist. She would not report the flaw. She would not prevent the launch. She would let them walk right up to the edge of the cliff, full of arrogance and pride. And at the moment of their greatest triumph, she would be the one to show them the abyss waiting for them below. The flaw was no longer just a piece of evidence. It was leverage. It was the centerpiece of her plan, the Trojan horse that would carry her from the desolate plains of her demotion back into the heart of the city, not as a supplicant, but as a conqueror. She began to work with a new, feverish intensity, not on code, but on a presentation. She created a video of the simulated crash, a slick, devastating visualization of the impending disaster. She wrote a clear, simple explanation of the flaw, one that any non-technical board member could understand. And she prepared a final slide, a solution to the problem that only she, the system's original architect, could implement. The ghost that haunted the machine was done watching. She was now setting the stage for a haunting of a very different kind. Ilara had the evidence. She had the weapon. She had the motive. What she didn't have was a stage. Her plan was audacious and theatrical, hinging on a moment of maximum public exposure. The evidence couldn't just be sent in an anonymous email to HR. That would be buried, dismissed, explained away. No, this required a public execution, a moment of undeniable truth beamed into the eyes of the entire company leadership. The upcoming quarterly innovation showcase was the perfect venue. It was Marcus's chosen stage for his moment of triumph, where he and Chloe would present Chimera to the CEO and the board. Ilara intended to hijack his coronation and turn it into his indictment. But a ghost cannot simply walk onto a stage and command the spotlight. She was a data entry clerk in a forgotten corner of the building. She had no access to the event's scheduling, the audiovisual controls, or the presentation servers. Her digital keys opened the back doors to Project Chimera, but the showcase was a different fortress entirely. For the first time, she realized she could not do this alone. She needed an accomplice. She needed a ghost of a different kind, a ghost in the company's very infrastructure. Her search was as methodical as her investigation. She needed someone with the right access, the right skills, and most importantly, the right motivation. Her mind sifted through the company's roster, dismissing person after person. Too ambitious, too timid, too loyal to the corporate structure. And then, a name surfaced from her memory: David Chen. David was a senior systems administrator in the IT department, a quiet, almost invisible man who was one of the most brilliant network engineers in the company. He was the silent engine that kept Innovatic's digital heart beating. Ilara also remembered something else. About a year ago, David had discovered a massive security vulnerability in a server migration project led by Marcus. David had flagged it, but Marcus, worried it would delay his timeline, publicly dismissed his concerns in a leadership meeting, belittling David's expertise and calling him an alarmist. Marcus then had his own team implement David's proposed solution and shamelessly took full credit for proactively identifying and resolving a potential issue. Ilara had witnessed the quiet, burning humiliation in David's eyes that day. Marcus hadn't just stolen his work, he had insulted his integrity. David Chen had a reason to hate Marcus Thorne. Recruiting him was a delicate operation, a dance of calculated risk. A direct approach was out of the question. She began by observing him from a distance, studying his habits. He was a creature of routine, always the first in the IT department and the last to leave. He ate lunch at his desk, and his interactions with colleagues were brief and purely technical. He was a professional hermit, a man who trusted systems more than people. Perfect. She orchestrated her first contact late one evening, finding him alone in the deserted IT wing. She didn't mention Marcus. Instead, she approached him with a complex, esoteric question about server-side data caching, a problem related to her old work on Chimera. It was a question that only a true expert would appreciate. David looked up from his monitor, surprised. He listened intently, and for the first time, she saw a spark of intellectual curiosity in his tired eyes. He gave her a thoughtful, detailed answer, and for a few minutes, they spoke as peers, two technical minds appreciating a complex problem. She had shown him she respected his intellect, the very thing Marcus had belittled. A few days later, she made her second move. She found him by the coffee machine, again after hours. "I was looking through some old project archives," she said casually, her voice low. "It's incredible the things that get left behind on the servers. A person can reconstruct entire histories if they know where to look. Some people are incredibly careless with the trails they leave." She looked him directly in the eye as she said it, a clear, unspoken signal passing between them. An IT admin like David understood exactly what she meant. He knew the digital ghosts that lived in the company's servers. A flicker of understanding, and something else intrigue crossed his face. He simply nodded. "Yes," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "They are." It was the confirmation she needed. The hook was set. The next day, she left a prepaid, untraceable burner phone in a discreet envelope on his desk with a simple note, a time and a location for a meeting, a quiet cafe miles away from the office. He showed up. He sat across from her in the small booth, a nervous energy about him, his eyes scanning the cafe. Alara didn't waste time with pleasantries. She slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a single document, a copy of an invoice from Thorne Strategic Solutions with the payment authorization signed by Marcus Thorne. "This is a shell company owned by Marcus's brother-in-law," she said calmly. "He has billed Innovatech for over $500,000 in fraudulent consulting fees on Project Chimera in the last 6 months alone." David stared at the screen, his face paling. This was not a rumor or a grievance. This was hard, undeniable proof of a crime. "I remember the day of the QSys server meeting," Alara continued, her voice soft but firm. "I was in the room. I saw what he did to you. He stole your work and humiliated you to protect his own timeline. The man you see in that document is the same man who did that to you. He builds his success on the work and the silence of people like us." David looked up from the tablet, his eyes meeting hers. The simmering resentment he had buried for a year was now stoked by the cold, hard proof of Marcus's corruption. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice tight. "The Innovation Showcase," Alara said. "Marcus and Chloe are the keynote speakers. When they take the stage, I need to own the presentation. I have the content. I need you to provide the delivery system. A window of 5 minutes. That's all I need." David was silent for a long time, the risk of what she was asking warring with the prospect of long overdue justice. He was a man who lived his life in the background, a man who avoided conflict. But the evidence on the screen was irrefutable, and the memory of his own public humiliation was a wound that had never healed. He looked at Alara, at her calm, determined face, and saw not a reckless crusader, but a competent, meticulous strategist. He slid the tablet back across the table and gave a single, decisive nod. 5 minutes, he said. "I can get you 5 minutes." The alliance was forged. The ghost in the machine had found her operator. With their alliance forged in a quiet cafe over the cold, hard proof of corporate malfeasance, the abstract concept of revenge began to take on a concrete, architectural form. The plan needed a blueprint. The weapon needed a delivery system. 2 weeks later, the catalyst arrived in a company-wide email. The subject line glowed on Alara's monitor like a starting gun. Innovatech Quarterly Innovation Showcase. It was scheduled for a Friday, 3 weeks away, in the main corporate auditorium. The email highlighted the keynote presentation, Project Chimera, a new paradigm in predictive analytics, presented by Vice President Marcus Thorne and Senior Project Lead Chloe Reed. A picture of Marcus and Chloe, smiling and confident, was embedded in the announcement. To the rest of the company, it was a celebration of success. To Alara and David, it was a countdown clock. 3 weeks to build the perfect trap. Their collaboration was a masterclass in clandestine operations, conducted in the shadows of the very corporation they sought to disrupt. They communicated exclusively through their encrypted burner phones, their messages brief and cryptic. Their meeting place was the digital world, but they exchanged physical materials through an old-fashioned dead drop. David had identified a loose brick in the retaining wall of a small, forgotten park halfway between their apartments. He would leave an encrypted USB stick there, containing schematics of the auditorium's A divided by V network, security protocols, and server access logs. Alara would retrieve it after dark, take it home, and study the digital battlefield. In turn, she would load the stick with the custom-coded software she was building, a digital ghost designed to slip into the presentation system and leave it for David to pick up the next morning. They were two spies in a silent war, moving with a discipline and paranoia that their enemies, drunk on arrogance, could never imagine. David's reconnaissance was flawless. He confirmed the presentation system was a closed network, but he found its vulnerability: a single, hardwired maintenance port on the main server, located in a locked A, divided by V closet behind the auditorium stage. Physical access was the only way in. The showcase technicians run a full diagnostic 48 hours before the event. David texted Alara one night, "That's my window. I can schedule a system firmware upgrade for the same time. I'll have about 30 minutes alone with the server." Alara's task was to write the code. It couldn't be a blunt instrument, it had to be a surgeon's scalpel. She designed a dormant remote access Trojan, a piece of software that would look like a harmless system file, completely invisible to standard diagnostic scans. It would do nothing until activated, and the activation trigger was her masterstroke. It would be a simple, encrypted signal sent from a custom application on her phone, an app David had disguised as a generic notepad. At the critical moment in Marcus's presentation, all she would have to do is type a specific code word into her phone and press save. The Trojan would wake up, sever the connection from the podium laptop, and give her control of the massive screen behind the stage. While they toiled in secret, Marcus and Chloe were basking in the premature glow of victory. They held high-profile rehearsals, their voices echoing in the empty auditorium. Alara, from her dungeon on the 3rd floor, would occasionally be forced to witness their triumphant parade through the office. One afternoon, Chloe stopped by her desk, holding a tablet. "Hey, Alara," she said, her voice dripping with the same false pity that had become her signature. "Marcus wanted me to get a second pair of eyes on this slide. It's some of your old back-end stuff. Does it look right to you?" It was a slide detailing Chimera's robust security features, a grotesque lie that made Alara's blood run cold. She looked at the slide, then up at Chloe's smug face. "Looks fine from here, Chloe," she said, her voice a flat monotone. "I'm sure your presentation will be unforgettable." The double meaning was lost on Chloe, who simply smiled, satisfied with this small act of dominance, and walked away. The encounter was infuriating, but it was also fuel, hardening Alara's resolve into something unbreakable. The day of the firmware upgrade arrived. It was the moment of greatest risk, the hinge upon which the entire plan swung. Alara sat at her desk, her hands clasped under her desk to keep them from shaking, her eyes fixed on the clock. David, miles away in the cool, dark A divided by V closet, was a bundle of nerves. He had the USB stick with Alara's code. As he worked, methodically disarming the server's security protocols, he heard footsteps outside the closet door. His heart hammered against his ribs. The handle jiggled. "Everything okay in there, Dave?" a voice called out. It was a security guard. David froze, his mind racing. "Just fine, Gary," he called back, his voice remarkably steady. "Running the new firmware patch from corporate. You know how they are with these showcase events. triple-checking everything. "Alrighty," the guard said, his footsteps receding down the hall. "Don't break the internet." David leaned against the server rack, taking a deep, shuddering breath. He quickly installed Elara's Trojan, re-enabled the security, and erased the access logs. He walked out of the closet 30 minutes later, drenched in a cold sweat, but the package had been delivered. That night, from his apartment, he sent a single text to Elara's burner phone. "The ghost is in the machine." On the eve of the showcase, everything was in place. Elara sat in her apartment, running through her own presentation one last time. It was a symphony of destruction. The texts, the emails, the fraudulent invoices, and the horrifying simulation of Chimera's catastrophic failure. It was a story of betrayal, greed, and incompetence, ready to be told. The trap was set. The bait was the promise of glory. All that was left was for the architects of her misery to walk onto the stage and claim their prize. The day of the reckoning arrived, cloaked in the cheerful, self-congratulatory buzz of a corporate event. The Innovatech auditorium was a sea of expensive suits and expectant faces. Board members, senior executives, and department heads filled the front rows, their polite applause echoing in the cavernous space as the event began. The air was thick with the scent of ambition and catered coffee. From her seat in the back row, nearly lost in the shadows, Elara Vance watched the stage. She was a ghost at the feast, an invisible witness to her own erasure. She felt a strange, preternatural calm settle over her. Her heart was a steady, rhythmic drum, her mind a sliver of ice. In her pocket, her hand rested on the cool, smooth surface of her phone. Everything, the months of humiliation, the sleepless nights of planning, the meticulous gathering of evidence, had come down to this single moment, to a simple press of a button. Marcus Thorne and Chloe Reed walked onto the stage to a fresh wave of applause. They were the picture of corporate success. Marcus, in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit, radiated a smug, unassailable confidence. He was a king in his court, about to receive his crown. Chloe stood beside him, poised and smiling, her dress a vibrant splash of color under the bright stage lights. She was the brilliant protégé, the rising star. Their presentation began, a symphony of slick graphics and carefully rehearsed talking points. They spoke of innovation, synergy, and disruptive technology. They presented Elara's architectural diagrams as their own, her breakthroughs as their strategic insights. They were not just presenting a project, they were performing a theft in broad daylight, and the audience was giving them a standing ovation for it. Elara watched them, her expression unreadable. She felt no anger, no pain. All emotion had been distilled into a singular, cold purpose. She listened to their lies, their voices amplified throughout the auditorium, and she waited. The cue they had agreed upon was a moment of supreme arrogance. It came near the end of the presentation, as Marcus prepared for his grand finale. He gestured to the massive screen behind him, which displayed the gleaming logo of Project Chimera. "So you see," he boomed, his voice resonating with theatrical pride, "we haven't just built a product. We have built a new foundation for this company's future. A foundation that is flawless, that is secure, and that is, above all, infallible." That was it, infallible. The word of ultimate hubris. In the dim light of the back row, Elara slowly drew her phone from her pocket. She unlocked the screen and opened the simple, disguised app that looked like a notepad. Her thumb moved with deliberate grace, typing a single 5-letter word, AUDIT. She pressed save. For a full second, nothing happened. Then, the massive screen behind Marcus flickered. It went black, plunging the stage into a momentary, dramatic darkness. A confused murmur rippled through the audience. Marcus laughed, a little too loudly, into the microphone. "Ah, a little technical glitch," he said, trying to regain control. Even the best systems have their moments. But the screen did not return to his logo. It came back to life with a stark white background and a simple black timeline. On the left side were dates, each one corresponding to a screenshot of an inappropriate text Marcus had sent her. On the right side were her polite, professional deflections. The final entry on the timeline was the date of her demotion, placed next to the final text he had sent. The implication was immediate, brutal, and crystal clear. The murmuring in the auditorium intensified, turning from confusion to hushed, shocked whispers. The executives in the front row leaned forward, their brows furrowed. Marcus's smile froze on his face, then melted away, replaced by a ghastly, pale confusion. His eyes darted from the screen to the A divided by V booth at the back of the room, but no one was helping him. Before he could speak, the screen changed again. Now it displayed the fraudulent invoices from Thorne Strategic Solutions, side by side with the official business registration documents linking the shell company to his brother-in-law. The whispers in the room turned into audible gasps. This was no longer just a shocking personal indiscretion. This was grand larceny. This was a crime. Chloe stood paralyzed, her face a mask of pure horror. Her eyes, wide and terrified, darted between the damning evidence on the screen and the thunderous faces of the board members. The dream of her career was evaporating before her very eyes. But Alara's presentation was not finished. This was the coup de grace. The screen cut to the slick, familiar interface of Project Chimera. But then, a video began to play. The simulation Alara had created. The entire auditorium watched in stunned silence as their company's billion-dollar savior began to self-destruct. They saw the memory usage skyrocket, the system warnings flash red, and then the final, catastrophic crash. The screen went black again, and 3 lines of stark, terrifying text appeared. Critical system flaw detected. Projected outcome on launch, catastrophic failure. 100% certainty of total data breach. The room was utterly silent. The air crackled with tension and the cold fury of betrayed investors and executives. Marcus Thorne stood on the stage, a statue of a broken man, his face white, his mouth agape. He was a king whose castle had just been revealed to be made of sand, and the tide was now coming in. The presentation had one final slide. It was Alara's old corporate headshot, her name and her employee number. Beneath it, a single line of text: original architect and lead developer, Project Chimera. As the image burned itself into the retina of every person in the room, Alara Vance slowly, deliberately, stood up from her seat in the back row. 100 heads turned, a wave of recognition and shock passing through the crowd. She said nothing. She didn't need to. In the ensuing chaos, her silence was the most powerful statement of all. The ghost had returned to the machine, not for a haunting, but for a reckoning, and it was now complete. The chaos that erupted in the auditorium was instantaneous and absolute. In the front row, board members were on their feet, their faces a mixture of disbelief and cold fury. Executives were speaking urgently into their phones, their voices sharp with panic. On stage, under the harsh, unforgiving lights, the 2 architects of their own destruction stood frozen in the wreckage. Chloe Reed had collapsed into a sobbing, incoherent mess. Marcus Thorne was a statue of pure shock, his mind clearly unable to process the speed and totality of his downfall. Security guards moved swiftly toward the stage, their purpose clear. The public spectacle was over. The private consequences were just beginning. As Marcus and Chloe were unceremoniously escorted off the stage, the walk of shame for a journey they began with such arrogance, every eye in the room turned, as if pulled by an invisible string, to 2 focal points of power. The company's formidable CEO, Arthur Sterling, who was now making his way to the stage, and the silent, solitary figure of Alara Vance, still standing in the shadows at the back of the room. Arthur Sterling, a man whose calm demeanor was legendary, stepped up to the podium. A hush fell over the frantic crowd. They expected damage control. They expected a denouncement of the chaos, perhaps even of the woman who had triggered it. As of this moment, Sterling's voice boomed, steady and authoritative. Mr. Thorne and Miss Reed are suspended, pending a full investigation which has already begun. Project Chimera is frozen. No one is to speak to the press. Is that clear? He surveyed the room, his gaze sweeping over the shocked faces. Then, his eyes found Alara. He looked at her, and the hardness in his expression softened, replaced by something complex: weariness, regret, and a flicker of profound respect. He turned back to the microphone. "Now," he said, his voice lowering slightly, "allow me to provide some context." He paused, letting the silence stretch. Most of you in this room know Ilara Vance as one of our most gifted software architects, a quiet, brilliant employee. But there is a part of her story that, at her own insistence, has been kept private until now. The crowd leaned in, a palpable sense of anticipation filling the air. This was the final, missing piece of the puzzle. "When my brother and I founded this company 40 years ago," Sterling continued, "we made a promise to build it on merit. When my brother, David Vance, passed away, he left his considerable share of this company to his only daughter." Sterling raised a hand and pointed directly at Ilara. "What you have witnessed today was not an act of a disgruntled employee. It was an act of an owner. An owner who, wishing to prove her worth without the weight of her name, has been conducting a silent and deeply personal audit of her own investment. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to properly introduce you to my niece and a principal shareholder of Innovatech, Miss Ilara Vance." A collective gasp, a wave of pure shock, washed through the auditorium. It was a twist so stunning, so absolute, that it retroactively reframed the entire narrative. Ilara was not a victim who had gotten lucky. She was a queen who had been moving her pieces in secret, waiting for the perfect moment to declare checkmate. Her actions were not just revenge. They were a righteous, if brutal, reclaiming of her family's legacy from the corruption that had infested it. The aftermath was swift. Marcus Thorne was arrested before he even left the building, the evidence of his fraud so complete that there was no room for denial. Chloe Reed was fired, her career in ruins, a pariah in an industry built on reputation. The story of Ilara's quiet, methodical takedown became the stuff of corporate legend, but she did not take Marcus's title, nor did she retreat into the quiet life of a wealthy shareholder. Instead, Arthur Sterling announced that Ilara would be leading the newly formed Chimera Recovery Task Force, granting her absolute authority to clean up the mess, to rebuild her project, and to root out anyone else who had enabled Marcus's corrupt regime. Her power was no longer silent or secret. It was official, earned not through her name, but through a trial by fire that she had orchestrated and won. Her story serves as a chilling reminder, a lesson written in the language of corporate warfare. In the relentless pursuit of success, it is easy to mistake silence for weakness, to see compliance as consent. But do not ever underestimate the silence of a person who has endured too much. For that silence is a forge, a place where patience is sharpened into a weapon, where pain is transmuted into purpose, and where a plan can be laid with a precision that the loud and the arrogant can never comprehend. When those people finally decide to speak, their voice will not be a plea, it will be a verdict. The cleanup of Innovatech is a story for another day. But as you leave this one, remember that in every office, in every cubicle, there is a story waiting to be told. Join us next time for another dispatch from the front lines of the corporate battlefield.